Alrighty, so this is going to be our article summary of Arnie Gulich's and his collaborators of his paper, "What Makes a Champion: Early Multidisciplinary Practice, Not Early Specialization, Predicts World-Class Performance." Sorry for the jumble up there. Alrighty, so discuss some of the background. Gulick and his collaborators were interested in determining the root cause of long-term success in sports, and they essentially looked at if specialization or diversification in activities in sports was more beneficial because um, earlier in the literature there was a commonly held belief that specialization in sports predicted long-term success, and many parents and coaches believe that it's important to like help a child identify their favorite sport and then to put all of their resources, all of their investments into that specific sport or discipline. Um, but this article is more so concerned with comparing the specialization strategy with the multidisciplinary approach. So I'll start off with a quote that I will touch on later. But the greatest samurai of all time, Miyamoto Musashi, said, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything." And this, he was referring to Taoism, which the central idea is coming, in touch with the way of the universe. But Gulick set out to compare specialization and diversification in order to, help sports organizers, whether they be parents, coaches, or the athletes themselves who are picking their activities. And he also kind of used this paper as a proxy for other modes of human performance. He goes to say, I believe later on in the paper, that he did a study, or he looked at a study of Nobel Prize or Nobel laureate winners, and I believe 43 out of 48 of them had a multidisciplinary background instead of just putting all of their time and effort into whatever it was that won them the prize. Um, and so it's kind of the classic case of Tiger Woods, who at 2 years old was on TV playing golf and who put every last ounce of his being into golf and golf specifically. So it's looking at that approach versus kind of like the Patrick Mahomes approach, where Mahomes grew up playing a handful of sports. At Texas Tech, he played both football and baseball. He was drafted into the MLB. He played basketball in high school, and then he grew up playing golf and continues to play golf today. So Gulick looked at these results across sort of like a three-dimensional figure that is demonstrated on right with figure one, where they would compare the activity or the sport classified as either coach-led or participant-led. And then from the play perspective, they would judge if they were engaging in more practice or play. And then from a sport perspective, they were looking at if these young athletes had young and adult athletes were engaged in a single sport or multiple sports. And so, as far as like the methods of the study, this was a meta-analysis, and they accumulated results from over 6,000 samples or 6,000 athletes, and noticeably, they they studied, I believe, like 3 or 4 times as many specialized athletes, um, which is interesting because kind of the inherent bias of the paper is that they're making the case for diversification. So they went ahead and you know, clearly looked at the opposing argument probably more strongly than the argument that they were going for. So the breakdown as far as demographics go, um, they were 68% male athletes and 32% female. And as far as geography, there were 15 different countries that were included. whereas 57% of the athletes were participating in team sports and 43 were participating in individual sports. So if you look at figure 3 on the right, they're looking at, I guess, percentages of the total sample, and the black bars are referring to senior athletes, and this is referring more so to athletes engaged in events that don't have an age limit. So it could be, if you're within the black bar, you're competing against a range of, 18-year-olds to fully grown adults. And then the junior athletes were in competitions and in sports that were age bracketed because, you know, maturity and, the differences in physicality from an age perspective are a lot more noticeable in the youth setup. So in order to, further break down the data, they grouped all of the 6,000 or so athletes into 104 categories. So they had 772 subjects in the world class category. And in order to get into this, you would have to be either placed in the top 10 at an international championship. An example of that would be the Olympics or any other, international championship like Pan American Games. Little over 3,000 were in the national class, and these were athletes that were placed onto a national team, as in maybe competing in the Olympics, but not placing in the top 10, or they placed in the top 10 of a national championship. And then for about 1,700 in the regional class, these were athletes that competed below the national level, but above the county level. And then the remaining 590 subjects were everybody that was below that bar. So as far as starting age goes, the junior athletes, an earlier starting age was associated with relatively higher performance in junior sports. And then for senior athletes, starting later was associated with higher performance in, the adult competitions. So senior world-class athletes started their main sports significantly later than other performance levels below them. And these athletes achieved their milestones later than all the other groups, whereas the high-performing junior athletes would achieve these milestones, closer to their teens. So as far as starting age predictions, the athletes achieving higher performance levels and those achieving lower performance levels began playing their main sport at a similar age. So it doesn't really matter when you pick up your sport. It's the variables around that sort of affect it. So yeah. And as far as positive skill transfer, there was no difference between junior world-class athletes and national world-class athletes in other sports accumulated throughout their career. Athletes achieved relatively higher performance levels from their main sport practice than did athletes achieving lower performance levels. So higher performing senior athletes engaged in more multi-sport play up to the age of 15, whereas the high performing junior athletes, if they were to diversify their skill set and play other sports, this was actually associated with lower performance. So it's essentially saying that specialization is the best route up to a certain point, but if you want to become a genuinely successful athlete over the course of your life, it's a much better idea to try all the sports you can. And I guess the greatest finding was that the predictor of higher level senior performance was the opposite of the predictor of higher level junior performance. So if you look here at the graph, they look at age-related predictors, and the main sport starting age. It was earlier in the junior categories and then later in the senior categories, and those were predictors of higher performance. For junior performance, like the ones who perform better at the junior level, many of them achieve these milestones earlier, and then at the senior level, like I said earlier, they achieve these milestones much later in their career. As far as like the amount of sports that they participated in, it was more beneficial for junior athletes to participate more so in their main sport and less in their adjacent sports. And the exact opposite was found for senior athletes. And yeah. So the central findings of this study were first, that the amount of multi-sport practice was a critical predictor between adults who achieved world-class levels and national class. And that early sport specialization was a predictor of success, but only at the junior level. And when they looked at the differences between youth-led play and coach-led play, there were no significant effect on the levels of achievement and performance for either senior or junior level. And so now we'll get into suggestions that we can make about the future of the way youth sport is organized. And it's likely that all the money that is being pumped into all of these prep schools and youth sport academies and elite sports schools, kind of similar to the Bow Dome that we learned about in class. But it's likely that these avenues provide no effect on the long-term success of athletes, and that they often compromise this long-term success through the form of burnout or overuse injuries. And another incentive that was mentioned in the paper was, should we look at increasing the length of youth sport coaching contracts? Because at the end of the day, isn't the whole purpose of youth sport to raise better people? Or is it to win? Like, are we really, focused on winning at the youth level? It's just kind of funny to me that we have these organizations and these sports in place to help raise our children, not as like a form of entertainment. You watch the Super Bowl to see who's going to win. You don't show up to your 8-year-old son's football game to see if he'll win or lose. You just want to see him, participating in something he enjoys that'll be beneficial in the long run. And so the goal for future work is to further investigate the developmental participation patterns that would lead to the highest senior performance levels, rather than only junior level performance, considering, I think 99% of the kids that are participating at the junior level won't make it to the senior level. But as far as like other ways we could go about it, we could maybe look at different age ranges and so on. So as far as implications go, the relatedness of the youth sports had no impact on later performance. One example I can think of is Vasily Lomachenko, who's one of the greatest boxers in the world right now. He's had a few losses, but what made him so good was that his dad pulled him out of boxing at a young age and put him into traditional Ukrainian ballet. These two sports have very little relation, but fast forward to his adult career, and Lomachenko is able to use his quick and nimble feet to um, move around his opponents and to make a difference from different angles. He has just much better feet than all the other boxers he's competing against. And another big thing with this paper is that the theory of giftedness, or like the theory that beginner's luck or early success at a young age predicts later success, is pretty much entirely debunked. Um, with all this being said, you can see why diversification is productive in the long run, but they don't really do any research as into why. The authors did offer three hypothetical explanations that are, subject for more research. The first one being sustainability. So they said if you played multiple sports, you were less likely to have overuse injuries and less likely to um, have burnout. And then the multiple sampling and functional matching hypothesis essentially states um, by trying multiple sports, you're able to find the one that you're best at. Kind of like, you know, when your parents would tell you to try all your food, to try all the foods so you can figure out what you like and not to be picky. And the third hypothetical explanation is the transfer as preparation for future learning hypothesis. It's essentially saying that by trying multiple different sports, we enhance our overall ability to learn. So by being humble and trying new things, you just learn the whole process of getting better at things. Um, but throughout this study, they really only looked at outcomes, and so they didn't account for confounding variables as far as um, socioeconomic socioeconomics or opportunities to play sports in your given community. They didn't look at familial support, or any aspect of the athlete's psychology. So, in conclusion, I'll touch back on the Miyamoto Musashi quote that I mentioned at the beginning. He is widely regarded as the greatest samurai of all time, and he was also a talented carpenter, skilled in calligraphy. He was a sculptor and an architect. And touch back on the original quote: "When you see the way broadly, you see it in everything." And this is from the Book of Five Rings. It's essentially saying when you figure out how to get good at many things, you begin to see the ultimate, like, way of the universe. And so there are plenty of modern examples of the benefits of diversification in sports. For example, LeBron James was on his high school football team and it was all state. Michael Jordan quit playing basketball right in the prime of his career to play baseball. He's also an avid golfer. Patrick Mahomes played baseball at Texas Tech as well as basketball in high school, and he still golfs to this day. Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders both were notably the only athletes to ever play professional in two different team sports, both in football and baseball. Jim Brown, who is regarded as like the best football player of all time until recently, was on the Syracuse track, basketball, lacrosse, and football teams. And Jackie Robinson participated in football, track, and basketball outside of baseball. So there are plenty of countless examples, and there are counter examples, like I said, of Tiger Woods, who completely specialized in golf, and the Williams sisters, who spent all of their time in tennis. But when you look at the big picture, diversification is much better for your performance. And if you specialize, it may help you in the short term, but it is kind of unlikely that motivation will the motivation and performance will continue later in your career. And I know Tiger Woods is obviously the best golfer of all time, but it is pretty noticeable that a great bulk of his success was achieved at such a young age, and he kind of tailed off. I don't know if he had enough activities in his life that kept him mentally healthy, and his career kind of fell apart at a pretty noticeable time. So with that being said, thank you, and here are my references.